Hey everybody, it's Chamber Matt, and today I am joined by Congressman Derek Kilmer, who is our representative in Washington D.C. for the Sixth Congressional District. Right?
You
All right.
got it. You got
Right.
it. Good to be with you. Good to see you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for joining me. So if for any viewers out there that aren't aware, what we're doing is we're doing interviews with the candidates, and I've got a bunch of other interviews that we've done for the general election. We did a few for the primary also. So if you want to go to our YouTube channel for the Port Orchard Chamber of Commerce, you can check those out. But right now we have Congressman Kilmer, and Congressman Kilmer's been generous enough to join us this morning, and I've got basically 6 questions. It's kind of the same 6 questions that I've asked every candidate. Um, None of them are particularly designed to make you squirm, but to just to kind of figure out where you stand on a few things. So,
Sure.
without further ado, Congressman, thank you for joining us today.
You bet. I hope you hear me okay. I've got two kids on the Wi-Fi, and I've been working a lot on rural broadband. Apparently, I should have also been working on suburban broadband.
Yeah,
So we're we'll do the best we can.
well, actually, I was on one of the interviews I had last week, and I actually lost internet connection in the middle of the interview, which was kind of embarrassing. Um, but it is broadband was the broadband question was one of the issues that was one of the topics that came up as a potential question that didn't make it, and it is something that's it's pretty
For
huge.
sure.
I mean, it ranks right up there with electricity and water anymore. So as
Absolutely.
soon as the rest of the country gets running water, they can get broadband too. So
Amen.
yeah. So first of all, I guess we'll just start out in a little introduction about yourself. Although who doesn't know Congressman Kilmer by now? And just first thing is, why in the world do you want to continue to run for public office in today's day and age?
Yeah.
What made you throw your hat into the ring, and then why do you think you're the best candidate?
Yeah. Well, I first ran for Congress because I thought new leadership was needed to fix Washington, D.C. And that means doing things a little bit different. It means bringing together Republicans and Democrats to try and find common ground, even though that can be hard. Uh, the News Tribune just endorsed me, and they called out the fact that I co-chair the Bipartisan Working Group, which is a coalition of Democrats and Republicans that really try to set aside the kind of partisan bickering and just focus on solving problems. And I've been recognized by the Bipartisan Policy Center as one of the most bipartisan folks in Congress. I'm the youngest committee chair in Congress. I chair a committee that's tasked with trying to make Congress work better for the American people. And as you can imagine, given that mission, there's plenty to do. But we've passed nearly 100 reforms unanimously, Democrats and Republicans. And that's pretty rare in Congress. I think many folks watching this know that my background professionally was working in economic development. I worked for KEDA's sister organization in Pierce County, the Economic Development Board for Tacoma Pierce County. And that's really what's motivated my service, is the belief that we need to create more economic opportunity for more people in more places. I'm focused on helping our region's economic recovery. We've got to help small businesses and help folks get back to work. I helped write the bipartisan legislation to support our recovery from COVID. That included things like rent and mortgage relief and help for students. And as your chamber members know, a lifeline for small businesses that are really the backbone of the district that I represent. But plenty more is needed to recover our economy, and I think my experience in economic development puts me in a position to make a difference. There's a lot of political candidates that talk about jobs and economic development. I actually have a background in it professionally. There's a reason groups like the National Retail Federation have named me a hero of Main Street. And, there's other things that I work on, obviously, given the extraordinary presence of military families and veterans in the district I represent. That's been a priority for me. It's one thing to talk about supporting our military families and veterans. It's another to have a record of doing something for them. I mean, we now have a new outpatient clinic for veterans in Kitsap County because I went to work on it. And I'm honored to have received the Silver Helmet Award from AMVETS, one of our nation's veterans groups. we've been working on trying to protect the important work that's done at the shipyard. And I was very honored to have received the U.S. Navy's Distinguished Public Service Award, which is the highest honor a civilian who's not employed by the Navy can receive from the Secretary of the Navy. So I think, I'm proud of the fact that, I've treated this like a job. And the campaign process is kind of like the job interview process. I always invite people to check my references. I'm proud to be endorsed by, mayors in Port Orchard and Gig Harbor and Bremerton, and legislators from throughout our region. And groups like the conservation voters and the firefighters and others, because I've been standing up to get stuff done for our community. But I'm not done. I'm not done working to get this economy on track. I'm not done working to get this Congress on track. And that's why I'm running for reelection, and why I'd be grateful for uh, the support of those who are watching.
All right, thank you. Great answer. So you touched on a bunch of things here, and so I guess the first real question for you is what do you think is and actually to give you a break, maybe I'll let you know there is a COVID question coming up too.
Okay.
So if you think COVID's the biggest thing, then we can kind of table it a little bit. But what do you think are the most important challenges right now facing our country, and how would you propose to address them?
Well, I think COVID is the biggie. One, we've got to defeat this virus. That means doing the testing and tracing and treatment that public health professionals say is necessary. I have sponsored and supported legislation to do that, because we will not see our economy get back recovered in the way that any of us want it to, until we get a handle on this virus. Um, there are other components of that as well. We got to make sure that people can pay their bills. As you can imagine, when someone reaches out to my office because they've lost their job or they've lost their business because of this pandemic, I'm not sending them a form letter. I'm calling them, and you know, it's really awful to hear the amount of just economic upheaval people have gone through. And so a big priority for me is just making sure that someone doesn't lose their home or lose the ability to feed their family because of something that's not their fault. And so part of my focus has been on things like rental assistance and protection from eviction and food assistance and those sorts of things to help people weather this storm. Obviously, the best way to handle unemployment is keep people employed. And in our region, that means making sure we're protecting our small businesses that, as I mentioned, are really, they're the cornerstone of the district that I represent. And so I have sponsored, I have pushed for additional support for small businesses, another round of that Paycheck Protection Program. I'm also a sponsor of a bill that's bipartisan to create an expanded employee retention tax credit. Really tries to get at some of those issues in a similar way, but through the tax code, by providing some help to businesses that are just trying to keep the lights on. So much of the federal response, though, Matt, so far has been trying to stop the bleeding. And at some point, we're going to have to really dig deep on not just how to stop the bleeding, but how do we get our economy up off the ground? I think there's a few components of that. A big priority for me is workforce development. We heard the chairman of the Federal Reserve say that one of the risks out of this pandemic is the erosion of skills. And so I'm a sponsor of a bill that's bipartisan in both the House and the Senate called the Skills Renewal Act to make sure we're providing some assistance to workers who've lost their job in instances where their job may not come back. The other thing, and I know the Port Orchard Chamber has been a partner in this, we got to look at infrastructure opportunity as well, infrastructure investment as a way of recovering our economy. Uh, Certainly, broadband is a component of that. I think one of the things we've learned through this pandemic is access to the internet is not just about whether you can, watch Cobra Kai on Netflix. It's about, whether your kid can keep learning if school moved virtual, or whether you can keep operating your business if your storefront gets shut down. Roads and bridges are a component of that. As you know, I've pulled together a community group to focus on fixing some of the problems at Gorst. If we do that, that could be a real win-win, maybe a win-win-win. It means people will spend less time sitting in traffic, Two, it's vitally important to the Navy. I know you've been part of those conversations in the Port Orchard Chamber. I tip my hat to you for being part of those conversations. The Navy has identified this as a real critical priority because it's important for resiliency. God forbid we ever have an earthquake or something like that. We need to protect the vital work that's done at the shipyard. But it's also a big potential driver of jobs because we've got that big area that's zoned for industry up at the Bremerton Airport. And I'm not sure that we will see the level of job growth that we want until we fix some of that traffic problem. And so I've made that a priority as well. But I really feel like there's a real opportunity for infrastructure investment in the year ahead. There's no such thing as a Democratic road or a Republican bridge. This is something that Democrats and Republicans ought to be able to get together on, get something done, and hopefully provide more economic opportunity for people in the short term and lay the foundation for our economic growth over the long haul.
All right. Well, I think we're done. Um, you answered all my questions, and you didn't even know it. I wanted to stop you there. Wait a minute, you answered the wrong question. so, so I will
Well,
ask you the next.
there are certainly other things that I think are priority issues for
Mhm.
our country and for our region. Um, you look at the district I represent. We're already seeing the impacts of climate change, so making sure that we step up to that challenge is significant. Making sure that, particularly in the midst of a pandemic, people and our small businesses have access to quality, affordable healthcare. All of these things are priorities, but it's hard not to focus on COVID when we've got such an urgent need. When so many people are being, listen, I mentioned I reach out to people directly. I talked to a woman from Port Angeles just a couple weekends ago, and she said, I've worked my entire life. And she said, up until March. And she said, I lost my job and I just have not been able to find another job. And she said, I used to organize the food drive for my small business for my employer. And she said, for the first time in my life, I went to the food bank because I needed to feed my family. Um, I talked to a small business owner a couple of weeks back who said, it took me 30 years to build my business. He said, I wanted to pass it on to my kids. And he said, I just can't weather this storm. And I'm really concerned that in the absence of a smart strategy, both to crush this virus and to recover our economy, we're going to see a lot of upheaval to our economy and a lot of unnecessary lost life. And so it has been a priority for me. I've been pushing for Congress to act. I've been pushing for Congress to act in a bipartisan way so that we can get something through the House, through the Senate, signed by the president, and start helping people.
So yeah. Um, so without the fear or with the fear of you repeating yourself on some of these issues,
Yeah,
the question that I have, and like I said, you've kind of answered it already, but
sure.
beyond the direct financial support through CARES and the grants that have been offered through the county, through the city, that KETA has put out, and and maybe PPP, because we just can't keep throwing more money at this thing, although that doesn't hurt. Um,
Mhm.
you know, is there any other support or anything that government can do to help the small businesses in the recovery other than throw more money at it?
Yeah. Well, I think, as I mentioned, my background was working in economic development professionally. My work was with small businesses, and it's what motivated me to run for office. I never thought I would ever run for office. I was just a grumpy economic development guy who kept saying, "Gosh, what government does and doesn't do sure impacts our ability to grow jobs." And finally, some of my friends said, "You seem to have a lot of good ideas, and you sure as heck complain a lot. Why don't you go do something about it, pal?" And so really my focus is on, and some of this is just respective to the degree to which our region depends on small businesses. Everybody says small businesses are the backbone of our economy. I think that's true, but I think about them more like, they're our star running back. If you look at how we generally make it out of recessions, it's not the big guys that get us out of it. It's not the big guys that are growing the jobs, racking up the tough yards and scoring the touchdowns. It's our small businesses that are. And right now they're getting tackled behind the line of scrimmage. And so I think part of the role of the federal government is to call some plays for our star running back. And Ideally, we can unleash beast mode. What that means is some of the stuff that has been done, I mentioned the employee retention tax credit. I'm a sponsor of also a bill called the Restart Act that provides some additional support to small businesses. There's some um, more focused legislation on industries that may have a longer uh, uh, path to recovery. There's a bill called the Restaurants Act that's bipartisan that I'm a sponsor of, just acknowledging that restaurants may take a little longer before they're back up to the operations that they were able to enjoy pre-pandemic. There are some other things that we can do to support small businesses. I think, frankly, the most important thing we got to do is we got to crush this virus. Small businesses will do a lot better when people can get back to work, when people feel comfortable going back and shopping and doing all the things that enable our economy to keep cooking. There are other things, though, as we look at Kitsap County. The discussion I raised about infrastructure investment and the issues around Gorst, that's about supporting small business development in Kitsap County. The work we're doing to support the Navy's presence, including, for that matter, I serve on the Defense Appropriations Committee, and uh, the Navy is looking at very substantial military construction at Naval Base Kitsap within the next few years. And so part of the reason I serve on that committee, part of the reason that I'm advocating for those investments is that enables us to both enable Naval Base Kitsap and Puget Sound Naval Shipyard to meet the needs of the Navy. It enables those installations to continue to be important employers for our region, but also they support the surrounding small businesses. We know that the Navy's presence has been really a buffer for us here in Kitsap County, and so we've got to maintain that as well.
All right, thank you. So again, um, you may repeat yourself a little bit in response to this next question, but this next question does revolve around workforce development.
Sure.
And one of the issues facing us is the local workforce. I mean, I still talk to a
Yeah.
lot of employers that with unemployment, and the number I got earlier this week or last week was it's like at 8.4% in Washington State as an unemployment rate, um, and there's a lot of people still hiring, and education funding. So I guess let me read the question. Is one of the issues facing local businesses is finding an adequately trained workforce. Education funding is often left to levies and not adequately funded at the state level. Um, so, what do you see the role of government in funding local schools and and by local I don't just mean K through 12,
Yeah.
postgraduate, um, you know, as far as school funding is concerned, and how would you implement those changes? And I guess again, it's not a matter of just throwing more money at something because then that kind of my last question is going to delve on the whole tax question, which sure we can throw money at things, but we've got to pay for it somehow. So, do you
Yeah.
have what's your ideas on that?
So part of the concern right now is that school districts are seeing additional burden because of the pandemic. Those that are doing in-person instruction, there's substantial costs associated with that, being able to acquire personal protective equipment and equipment to sanitize classrooms. So we're keeping staff and most importantly, keeping our kids safe. For those that are doing virtual instruction, there's cost associated with that as well. And so there certainly is a monetary component of this. And the concern is while our school districts and our colleges and universities are facing additional cost burdens, uh, the revenue coming into them is being strained as a consequence of this pandemic, and particularly as a consequence of the medically induced coma that our economy was in earlier this year. Unfortunately, what that has meant is the state of Washington and pretty much every municipal and county government is projecting pretty substantial revenue shortfalls. Well, why is that a problem? Well, one, it's a problem because, I'll give you an example. I did a Zoom with one of the community colleges in our region who had been told by the state to prepare a budget that would cut 15 to 20% out of their college budget. What that means is fewer opportunities for students, It means, unfortunately, potentially tuition increases for students at a time where they can least afford it. It also means um, you can't cut 15 to 20% out of a college's budget without laying a bunch of people off. That has downstream ramifications to our economy as well. As your chamber members know, um, people who are out of work aren't as good customers. And so part of the federal response, and in the first few COVID response bills, you saw bipartisan support for saying the federal government should step up and provide some help to state and local governments, and to tribal governments for that matter, to weather the storm. And now there's bipartisan conversation happening. And I think there will be bipartisan agreement on providing some additional resources to educational institutions, because as we know, education is how we compete. Education is how our nation competes with other countries. Education is how we grow our economy and make sure we have that skilled workforce. And so I think it would be a bad scene, not just for the state of Washington, but for the United States of America, if all of a sudden we saw substantial reductions in education investment and in opportunities for our kids. Beyond that, though, there's a couple things I've been working on that even one post-COVID, one pre-COVID, actually more than two. So post-COVID, I mentioned I've sponsored a bill that's bipartisan in both the House and the Senate, just to provide some training assistance for folks who've been made unemployed as a consequence of this pandemic, where their job may not come back. And what we want to do is make sure that someone whose job may not come back can attain a skill and get back into the workforce. Because as you point out, we have a lot of chamber members who are looking for good skilled workers. I'm also the sponsor of a bipartisan bill that would set up a new optional portable tax advantaged benefit called lifelong learning accounts. And the way it would work is entirely optional, but an employer could pay in, an employee could pay in, almost like a 401k uh, uh, or a health savings account, but around workforce training. And an employer would do that, and if they had an entry level employee that might have management potential, that employee could use that account to go take night classes at OC, or to go get a new industry certification. If that worker got laid off, they could use it to go get retrained. Uh, and the idea here is to try to empower people to navigate economic change rather than to be victimized by it. The other thing that I've focused a lot on, Matt, and you and I've talked about this before, is the importance of vocational training. Um, I have, as a member of Congress, met with more vocational classes and career and tech ed classes than I have with civics classes. And I've done that very intentionally because I think it's important to communicate to our kids, hey, not everybody has to go get a PhD in this, that, or the other thing. You know, there are a lot of great jobs that pay great wages if you follow a vocational track. And I think for too long, you had elected officials who kind of dissed that, who said, you know, there's something wrong with uh, being in a career and tech ed program. And so I think it's important, you know, one, for me as a leader to communicate that to young people, that there's not only is there nothing wrong with it, we need people to go into career and tech ed programs because we have an aging workforce. So that is a priority for me. But we've also I've sponsored bipartisan legislation that would provide some federal help if a high school, say South Kitsap High, wanted to do a partnership with a local employer to have career-connected learning opportunities in the high school, so that we could provide a smoother pathway from high school into the workforce. That's something that that we've worked on with a number of the school districts around our region. It's a bipartisan bill, and I'm going to work hard to see that we get that passed.
All right. Thank you. So the last question is the $1 million, or maybe I should say $1 trillion question. Um, because here in the U.S. we've got B&O taxes, and we've got gas tax, and an excise tax, and a sales tax, and income tax, and a capital gains tax, payroll taxes, emission taxes, property taxes, road mileage taxes. It seems like just about everything is being taxed. Um,
Mhm.
and you mentioned the budget shortfall, the kind of situation that every municipality and government agency is dealing with. Are there
Yeah.
solutions other than more taxes available to address our budget shortfall? And what would be your preferred method of dealing with the situation?
Yeah. Well, let me say part of the reason that I think it's important for the federal government to step up and provide support to states and localities is to avoid, a massive tax increase at the state and local level. Listen, every state is in the thick of this, and so what you've seen in the relief packages from the federal government is really an unprecedented response because we're in the midst of an unprecedented global crisis. At the federal level, you've seen economists really across the political spectrum agree that the investments that you've seen, uh, while exacerbating some of our debt concerns, have been really necessary to save lives in the midst of a global pandemic and to deal with really the carnage of the most significant economic disruption since the Great Depression. You just saw the chairman of the Federal Reserve actually say, we've still got a ways to go because in the absence of additional federal intervention, in his view, we could see a prolonged recession. And again, if we fail to defeat this virus, if we take our foot off the gas, if we fail to defeat this virus and fail to suitably recover our economy, if we have a weak recovery, the impact to our debt could actually be greater than if we just tried to cut this off at the pass on the front end. So that's tricky. Now, having said that, what that means is if the federal government is going to dedicate funds uh, to those purposes, one, it needs to make sure that those funds are being spent efficiently and effectively, which is part of the reason, as an example, I voiced concerns directly to the Secretary of Transportation when it was revealed that some of the funds that were targeted to small businesses through the PPP program were instead going to well-financed publicly traded companies. As a resident of the state of Washington, I have always hated the Los Angeles Lakers, but I particularly hated them when I heard that they were taking Paycheck Protection Program funds that were intended for small businesses on Main Street in Port Orchard. That doesn't make sense. And so that requires greater uh, oversight to ensure that dollars are being spent efficiently. On top of that, I voted for the creation of a new select committee to oversee how those COVID dollars get spent. And it was modeled after the Truman Commission that was established in the beginning days of World War II. Truman, at that time, said, we saw a lot of concern after World War I. He said, there were 116 investigating committees after the fact, after World War I. And he said, if we just had one committee before the fact, maybe we could prevent a lot of waste and maybe even save some lives. And that committee, that Truman Committee, cost less than $1 million, but prevented more than $15 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse. And so part of the reason that I've supported this new oversight committee is to try to ensure that as dollars are spent in response to this pandemic, that they're spent efficiently and effectively. Now, having said that, I have been vocal in acknowledging even before this pandemic that the debt is a problem because it means too often that our nation is borrowing money, often from countries that don't share our interest. Uh, it means that my kids and the kids of chamber members are going to see more and more of their paycheck going to pay off the national debt. What economists have said is we've got to get through this pandemic and that it would be a mistake. And this is true across the board, left and right and center. Economists have said you've got to make the investments necessary to try to crush this virus and avoid a prolonged recession or even a depression. But you've also seen a bipartisan understanding. Every bipartisan commission, nonpartisan commission, think tank that has looked at our nation's debt problem has pretty much concluded the same thing. And that is that this problem is too big solely to tax our way out of it, or to solely cut our way out of it, or solely to depend on economic growth as a strategy out of it. Rather, we're going to need a comprehensive approach to dealing with our national debt. And so, and that has been an approach that I have taken, whether it's been supporting targeted reductions to weed out programs that don't deliver, or whether it's been trying to improve the process through which Congress deals with budget and appropriations issues. Part of the problem that you've seen is that, in recent years, more often than not, Congress fails to pass a budget. It fails to, and you've seen government shutdowns and Congress sort of kick the can. I mentioned I chair a committee on trying to reform how Congress functions, and 7 of our recommendations deal with trying to reform the budget and appropriations process. Because I would argue part of the problem you have right now is a bad process yields bad outcomes, where you've got situations where members of Congress are deciding, okay, am I gonna vote for a spending bill that is not sufficiently targeted, but if it fails, we have a government shutdown? That's a process problem. And so you saw the committee I chair unanimously pass 7 recommendations to reform the budget and appropriations process. And I think one of the outcomes of that will be a more strategic approach to addressing our nation's debt.
All right. Thank you very much for those answers. Those are the questions that I have. And I'm going to let the viewers draw their own conclusions. But so, as we wrap this up, 2 things. One is that, I'm going to go ahead and say a few words, and then I'm going to let you have the last say, kind of. And then, then we can wrap things up, and I will
Sure.
I'll turn off the recording. But if you can stick around, I got a couple more questions for you too.
Okay.
So I want to wrap up and say thank you very much for coming and spending this time with us. I've learned a lot more. Like you said, I've been working on the committee with Gorse that you've put together with Senator Randall. I can see some good things happening with that, especially in light of the infrastructure packages and things that are coming down the pike. For the viewers, I would encourage everybody to check out this video, check out other videos, the other candidates that are running for office, and we've got about 2 weeks now, give or take a day, till the election, and then we can all get our TV back, we can all get our social media back, and our postal service back, and things like that. So Congressman Kilmer, would you like to kind of wrap things up and give some closing remarks for us?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I mentioned earlier, I sort of look at campaigns a bit like a job interview. You may have noticed, and people in Port Orchard, I've been honored to represent them since 2004. I've stood on, I think, every porch in Port Orchard over the years. I wish I could be doing that this year. But you'll notice I've never, in the mailings that I sent out or the TV commercials I do or ads in the paper, I don't talk about the person I'm running against. I talk about me, and just like I've never gone into a job interview saying, here's why you shouldn't hire the other guy, I say, here's why I hope you rehire me. And so let me just end by pointing out a few things that I hope will encourage folks to renew my contract. It's one thing to talk about jobs, it's another to do something about it. I spent a decade working in economic development professionally. When I was the state legislator for Port Orchard and the surrounding area, I passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill that created 18,000 jobs in our state. I was recognized by the Washington Economic Development Association 3 times for my work in support of economic development. And now, as our congressman, I've continued to work on those issues. That's really my priority, whether it's working on expanding broadband access to folks who need it or helping our small businesses navigate this difficult time. That's been a priority for me, helping our small businesses, helping folks get back to work. And as I mentioned, I was named a Hero of Main Street by the National Retail Federation for that work. I've continued to focus on trying to support our military families and veterans, and have a record of doing that. I'm honored to have received the Silver Helmet Award from AMVETS and to receive the Navy's Distinguished Public Service Award because I've worked to support our military families and to support our veterans. It's one thing to talk about bipartisanship. It's another to actually be bipartisan. I co-chair the bipartisan working group that the Lugar Center and GovTrack have identified me as one of the most bipartisan members of the U.S. House. And in fact, I won an award, was recognized by the Bipartisan Policy Center for my willingness to work with Democrats, Republicans, you name it, because I just want to get stuff done. And again, I invite you to check my references. I'm proud to be endorsed by mayors and council members from all over Washington's 6th congressional district, including the mayor of Port Orchard and of Bremerton and Bainbridge and Gig Harbor and down in Aberdeen and Tacoma and all over the place. State legislators as well throughout the region. And I'm proud that an article in the Washington Post listed me as one of the 5 most effective Democrats in Congress. But I'm not done working for our community. I'm not done working to get this economy cooking, and I'm not done working to get Congress on track. And that's why I'm running for reelection, and it's why I'd be very grateful for your support.
All right, thank you. So I said I'd let you get the last word in, but I changed my mind. Um, I would like to say thank you. And in my position, I guess most Americans may think that a congressman is this really important on the pedestal type guy, but I can tell everybody that's watching and listening that Congressman Kilmer puts his pants on one leg at a time. He is a normal guy. Um, Congressman, is there a way that people can get a hold of you? I know you've got a Bremerton office. I don't know if you've got that phone number off the top of your
I sure
head.
do.
And then your
I
website,
sure do.
things like that. Um,
Yeah, on the official side, and I should mention, one of the things I'm proudest of is the work that our caseworkers do. If a small business has an issue, if someone has an issue with the IRS, or most commonly in our region, it's the VA, reach out to our office. Our Bremerton number is 360-373-9725. My website is just kilmer.house.gov. And if you want to email me, it's easiest to just email me through the website. I also have an email newsletter that we send out every couple of weeks, and I'm on Facebook, and I'm at Rep Derek Kilmer on Twitter, and I'm on Instagram, but I kind of stink at it. Um, and then on the unofficial side of the house, I'm just derekkilmer.com. And folks can contact me through that website if they have a question related to the campaign. But I'm certainly honored to represent this area, and I hope to continue having the opportunity to fight for our community.
all right, thank you, Derek. Thank you for joining us. And 2 weeks, and it'll all be over with, and everybody can get back on with their lives. So thank you.